You do not want to be pessimistic. You want to be positive, okay? You want to be optimistic. But when it comes to the 90s, hey, there's nothing to remember. I mean, I'm a I'm an 80s kid, and there's a lot to remember from the 80s. I mean, the 60s, the 70s, even the 50s, Elvis Presley, the 40s, Second World War, the 30s, Frank Delano Roosevelt, Social Security. Well, the emerge of and the advent of the one with the mustache, the SSS, 1933, back in Germany, Europe, and what happened afterwards. But you s- there's always something to remember for every decade. But when it comes to the 90s, there's nothing to remember. I mean, just lousy stuff, clumsy stuff, things that are basically forgotten. Let's go back to the 90s. There was nothing, okay? No Vietnam War, no, no Second World War, no nothing. Let's just go through some events. Oh, you've got the fall of the Berlin Wall, uh, a conversation, a dialogue between Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan. Eventually, they back down and they decided to move forward to a capitalist society. Okay, then the first Gulf War. Yeah, yeah, Bush Senior. You can say that it was something. It was the previous chapter to what happened afterwards with his son W. Then you've got the Los Angeles riots. That's very important when it comes to America. Okay, that was very important. I've known people who used to live in Los Angeles at that time, and they still remember what happened. It was like going back to the 70s, okay, to the 60s when African American people were complaining and were claiming their rights. And I agree with that, okay. Then you've got the O.J. Simpson. If I'm not mistaken, the Los Angeles riots they occurred in 1993. Okay, O.J. Simpson. That was in back in 1994. That was a huge event when it comes to the media, and it happened in California, basically L.A. If I'm not mistaken. Uh, it was the first time that we had the opportunities to see sort of a reality show live. We already had MTV, we already had VH1, we had some reality show. We didn't have any reality shows at that time. They came afterward. They came with Big Brother Europe. Well, but it was the beginning. It was the beginning. However, let's remember this is a time when by surprise, a neighbor will tell us, "Hey, I've got this new way of communication. You don't have to send a letter anymore. I've got this stuff called email." Email. The first time that I heard about an email was back in 1993. Okay, the first time that I heard about the internet was back in 1990, late 1994, early 1995. Okay, and then the first time that I had a cell phone, I was very lucky. I had a cell phone back in late 1992, early 1993. Okay, it was one of those breaks. But the 90s, there's nothing about the 90s. Absolutely nothing about the 90s. Well, the rise of the internet, that's important. The grunge music scene. Okay, Nirvana. Nirvana. Okay, if I said that I'm an 80s kid, it was all about, at that time, The Cure, the Pitch Mode. You had a lot of bands, okay. You have some Californian bands in America, like uh, you had Poison, you had Motley Crue, you had the Chili Peppers, you had quite a few. You had quite a few. Cinderella. You had some bands going on in America, but yeah, Guns N' Roses, and they were good, but they were from the '80s. Okay, when grunge came in set in Seattle and California, yeah, it was new. It was good, but it was not better than the '80s. It was just the beginning of the '90s, but it didn't mean that much. Okay, there was no real good music. We had to wait until the end of the '90s for Creed to come up. Creed, Linkin Park, the Foo Fighters. Well, was part of Nirvana, of course, but we really didn't have good music in the '90s. Then we had the death of Princess Diana, 1997. The death of the son of John F. Kennedy, John Kennedy. He passed away a year later after Princess Diana, if I'm not mistaken. Then we had the release of the first Pokemon game. Well, I'm not into those games, but yeah, it was huge at that time. We had the impeachment of Bill Clinton. Okay, that was huge in America, and we had the release of the movie Titanic. What did I say? Nothing. That was nothing. I mean, that was literally nothing. Nothing happened in America in the '90s. Nothing. Absolutely. We had the Tiananmen Square protest. That was important in China. Okay, but eventually the Communist Party in China took over again, and nothing happened. So in the end, in the end, it's like an empty era. There is nothing to remember. I mean, the haircuts were lousy haircuts, horrible haircuts that I don't even remember. It was just the end of the '80s. Just the end of the '80s. There is nothing to remember. And I already mentioned music. When it comes to books, well, most of the great books were written prior to the '90s, where there were some good books written in the '90s. I would say Philip Roth. Uh, yeah, that would be one of the ones that I remember written in the '90s, and there were quite a few as well. But nothing that you can say, wow, that was an amazing decade. I wish I could go back to the '90s. There's nothing in the '90s. It's like nothing happened. It's lost in eternity, lost in the Milky Way. Nobody wants to go back to the '90s. Not even You don't even remember the jeans. You don't remember the shoes of the '90s. Maybe the suits, those horrible suits, baggy suits that you don't even wear. You wouldn't put on one of those suits. Some lawsuits, okay, some lawsuits were the Menendez lawsuit. Well, yeah, that was a kind of interesting, but other than that, I don't think even the battle between W and Al Gore, that was early 2000s, not even the late '90s, early 2000s. So what happened in the '90s? Nothing. I mean, if you were born in the '90s, I'm fine with that. But if you were a kid in the '90s, yeah, it was the last era where you were able to hang around in the neighborhood. That was the last era that you would leave your door unlocked and everything was good, nothing would happen. That was the last time that you had friends in the neighborhood. That was the last time, and not only in America, but if you go to places in South America, like Argentina, Chile, Peru, that was the last time as well that you would feel safe in your neighborhood. That's in the past in America. Parents would never leave their kids home alone. Parents would never leave their kids to spend 30 to 45 minutes in the streets with his or her friends. That is just not happening now. And the '90s were the last time where we saw those events happening. They were just in the past. Okay, so if you go back to the '90s, What's in it? There's nothing, absolutely nothing. What is it that I can remember? It was the last time that Michael Jackson had some good concerts and released his last singles and records. Then he made quite a few mistakes, and then he was arrested. But other than that, what is it that you remember from the 90s? The last time that we would go to the movies and we would enjoy the Oscars, that's a fact, yeah. Uh, Other than that, it was the first time that we would have cable TV. It was our primary source for entertainment rather than national TV. We didn't have at that time, the internet was in diapers. It was the beginning of the internet. We believe in Blockbuster. We didn't know anything about Netflix. At that time, we didn't know anything about we didn't know anything about social media. Social media started 5 years later. Well, in the beginning, it was MySpace. It was not real social media, MySpace. But when we saw Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube 2006, if I'm not mistaken, Twitter 2007, 08, Instagram 2008, Facebook 2004. Never had an account, but it was social media, pure 100% social media. But that was in the 2000s. So if you go back 60 months to the 90s, to the late 90s, to the end of the 90s, there's nothing, absolutely nothing. So what is it? What is it that you remember from the 90s? Nothing, not even vehicles. The Mustang, the real Mustang, changed its model, I would say, back in 2011, 2012. That was the first time that we saw a very nice Mustang being released in the market, and as well the Camaro. So what happened in the 90s? Nothing, nothing, not absolutely nothing. There is nothing to remember from the 90s. But the fact that we were lucky to being able to enjoy a nice cookout on the weekends. Okay, but other than that, the 90s, it's forgotten in eternity, in the Milky Way, in a black hole. There's nothing about the 90s that you want to remember. Absolutely nothing, unless you were born in the 90s. Other than that, goodbye.